Hello, my name's Cavan Scott, and for light and life, keep listening to JediCast.
People are counting on us. The galaxy is counting on us.
Solo, we'll figure it out.
We'll use the Force. That's not how the Force works.
Hello everyone, I'm Pat. I'm a reviewer from Hohe Republik, and I'm joined by my colleague Florian today.
Good afternoon.
And we're here with Cavan Scott.
Hello there.
Cavan is a prolific Star Wars writer, known mostly now for the Star Wars The High Republic initiative, but you've also written a lot for Star Wars Adventures, the Vader's Castle series, the Dooku Jedi Lost audio original. Very prolific writer, and we're glad to have you. Good afternoon to you too.
Good afternoon.
How have you been enjoying Noris Force Con so far?
Yeah, it's been amazing. I missed conventions so much during lockdown, and so it's been great to get back to sort of conventions, big and small, and travel as well, you know. And as you could probably tell from my accent, I'm from the UK, so it's any chance to get back to Europe, I take.
Have you had any interesting interactions so far at the conventions? Any fun moments?
I've had lots of food. They've been feeding me a lot, so I think by the end I'm going to look like Jabba. But no, it's been great. I mean, it's just always so interesting to sort of to have people come up and sort of talk about their first experience of your work. And actually, the thing that struck me on this one is so many people come up to me and said that thanks to the High Republic comics, they've started to read comics. And for me, as a comic fan of old, for someone who is a Star Wars fan because of the comics, that's always great. And so I've had quite a few conversations with people about that over the last couple of days.
Lovely.
Yeah.
And we're so glad to have you here.
Yeah.
It's amazing for all of us. If it's all right with you, we would like to start with a few writing questions in general.
Of course. Yes.
About your writing process, because you've written a lot of different media, and also a lot of different media that are based on scripts, like comics and audio dramas. So I was wondering, how does the writing process for both of these differ? Is it different to write a comic script or an audio drama script?
For script work, actually, it's all very similar, because when you're writing any kind of script, you're not writing for the end listener or reader, you're writing for your collaborator. So for a comic strip, particular High Republic, I'm writing for Aria. I obviously have the end reader in mind, but the script is basically a 27-page letter to Aria saying, this is what's in my head, can you make it good, please? And every now and then there's a little sketch, which hopefully will never make their way into an art book.
Please.
No. And lots of like links to various different things. And yeah, I mean, and like a TV script or a radio script, a comic script is very similar in the fact you have especially the way I write, you have a description for the artist, and then you have the dialogue, and just as you would have stage directions in a play or a film script as well. The way I work in pretty much everything is I write the dialogue first, then go back and add the descriptions. I largely plot out a page of how many panels and all those kind of things, because there's a lot of black arts around comic books about where you have the page turns and all those kind of things. But then always the note is, this is my idea for what it looks like. If you have something better, and you will have, go ahead, you know. So, and there's a lot of conversations go back and forth with Ariel on the High Republic, and Andrea, who's coming in as one of the other artists on the book as well. And yeah, there's a lot of discussion. It's a real collaborative process. And that's what I love about script work, whether it's on audio, comic, TV, whatever. It's the fact you're working in a team, which links into what I've been doing with the High Republic in general. That's why I like these projects.
Yeah, so that's very different from novel writing, where you're just
when it's just you and a typewriter or a keyboard, and yourself gets slightly going mad for months on end. Yeah.
Yeah. And how does the target audience factor into your writing? Because you're writing for younger audiences and for older audiences. Does that differ?
So like beyond scripts, right?
Yeah. I mean, it does. It plays into my mind of, obviously it's the view you're taking on the action. So I try and view every story, no matter what age. I try and approach them in the same way. but it's the lens you're seeing the story through. So obviously, writing something like The Rising Storm, I could be a little bit more an adult in the descriptions and the subject matter. But when it comes to planning the story, I approach everything the same. It's just then working out how to be responsible, you know. And also, I come from a British fiction background where children's books are supposed to terrify children to their very core. From Roald Dahl to anything, I have shown some of my editors in America some of the books I grew up on, and when I was doing the Choose Your Destiny books, which was a new experience because I'd never written Choose Your Own Adventure books, I showed them the Fighting Fantasy books we had when I was growing up, and they were appalled that there were characters being hung and lots of gruesome deaths. And it's probably the reason I have certain interests is because of books like that. And so I'm very much one for trying to push, you know, what we can put into these books. But again, you know, you have to be responsible. And so the target audience is always there. And I think as long as you bear that in mind, you treat them with respect. And then stories are stories.
All right, wonderful. So you've only just mentioned that, you know, you're working with comic artists, you're working with your fellow High Republic authors, and Star Wars: The High Republic is like this very huge collaborative tapestry, as you called it yesterday.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you use to help you keep track of all the characters and events as they happen in your titles and in other stories?
Yeah, when we have spreadsheets galore. It gets very, it seems to be very uncreative after a while, but you know, we have spreadsheets following all the characters. We have maps, mind maps following the main events through. There are documents that go on for pages and pages and pages and pages of stories that could happen, have happened, might happen, may now or never happen. And it's so, there are so many documents that we're all referring to and that people are updating. And it's been a case of trial and error sometimes. They're trying to work out how we are going to plan it, and some things have worked, some things haven't. And a lot of it as well is in our heads. You know, we've been so entrenched in this world, you know, a lot of it's there. And so we know, you know, especially, I talked yesterday on the panel that we've had these fixed points in the history that we know we're going to try and hit, including the end. And so everything we do is always with the conversation of how this particular story comes to a conclusion. So we're always bearing that in mind. That's always the pole star that we're heading towards.
Interesting choice of words there.
Yeah.
All right.
But that actually perfectly leads to our next question, because we were also wondering about the continuity between authors and taking up events from them. So do you also use the spreadsheets for that, or how does that work?
There's a lot of talking. You know, we have Slack groups, we have just like everyone else in life, we're on WhatsApp. You know, so there's all these things that we're flying back and forth. There is also, as well, there's Lucasfilm, you know, so Mike knows everything. There's Lindsay who is organising genius, who's sort of bringing everything together for us. And then the story group, and I mean, you know, story group, that is what they do. You know, they are very good at picking up things. Because now it's grown so big that we can't be over everything, not all the time. I still have to play catch up sometimes and read in some of the other material after it's come out, because it's not directly involved in something that I'm working on within the High Republic, that I have the, you know, the luxury of saying, right, I will read that one, but I don't have to read it now because I need to concentrate on this. And so with those moments, I go back to the author or whoever's involved and say, right, these are the points I'm hitting. Is anything in this work hitting those same points? And yeah, because it is a monumental task. You know, I mean, I know people have said there's a lot of the High Republic, and trust us, we know, because we have been trying to read it all as well as it goes on, and obviously multiple times. I mean, I think I've read these novels so many times in different variations of them. You know, and so. Yeah, there's been a lot to keep up with.
For us too. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We're all in this together, I guess. Yeah. Well, in the High Republic, you're of course dealing with your own creations, original characters, but also sometimes you're taking characters created by another High Republic writer. What are like the challenges or even benefits of that approach of taking characters created by somebody else and rolling with them?
Well, one of the benefits in this particular group is that we are obviously in communication all the time. So I suppose one of the characters I've taken on from someone else is Lorna D, which Charles created in Light of the Jedi. The benefit with that is that I had Charles on, speed dial. So if there was a question, I can go back to him or use him as a sounding board saying, what do you think? And obviously, when you're in the wider Star Wars world, you haven't always got that luxury. In Star Wars publishing, there is quite a good community, which has come out of doing books like From a Certain Point of View. I still maintain those books have created a community within the writers that wouldn't have been there beforehand. So we do all know each other, and we do to different levels. We do check with each other, but quite often, especially also if you're dealing with something from a film, or a TV series or a book from a few years back, you haven't got that communication. So that's been the benefit of the High Republic, and the fact that you can, it's a collaboration. So there are certain characters that you create with someone else, and you're going to be dealing with different aspects. So there's a lot of conversation. Sometimes there's a case of you ask permission before you do something to a character. Sometimes you ask forgiveness after you've done it, but knowing that,
for example,
I'm not going to say, but there are, moments where, again, you do something and you check with someone else, and obviously that's not going to work on the greater story, and you have to come up with an alternative. But those are the most creative moments because you both want to do something, and so you try and find a way that both of you will be fulfilled in the story you're writing. So it's so unusual, as you said, for when you're writing novels, it is usually you and your editor, but largely you on your own with the characters. To have a prose project when you've got so many different people writing the same characters or in the same timeline or in the same space, to have that communication has been wonderful because you don't usually get it.
Yeah, and we can see that it works because the characters all feel very continuous and they're really working in the story. So our next question is actually about something that Star Wars seems to be doing quite a lot, and that is doing prequels and sequels. And that's also something that you're doing in the High Republic. Yeah. And we were wondering, what does a good prequel mean for you?
See, the funny thing is, I'm not a fan of prequels. So, to be writing a prequel to a prequel is people have pointed this out to me. I think when a prequel doesn't work, it's where everything is just aiming to that point. When I feel, I know what's happening. A good prequel has to still surprise you. And it is possible because, let's face it, every historical story set on planet Earth is a prequel to the events of now. And I can go and watch as many Viking movies as I want. I know what happened to the Vikings, but as long as there's an exciting story, and it's an interesting story, it's good characters, I don't care because, just because I know where it's going now, again, this is probably quite topical at the minute. I sit and watch The Crown. I know exactly what happens to the Queen. We all know what happens to the Queen at the minute. But it's the way the story is told. And I think that's what we have now with dealing with the High Republic. We know in 200 years after the events that we've started writing about, we know what happens with the Death Star. We know what happens with the Jedi. We know what happens with the rebels. But we literally don't know what happens to these characters, And I think what we've got here is a prequel that's got such, it's not like we're 50 years before the events of, Phantom Menace. It's literally hundreds of years before. So we can tell a story that hopefully has its own beginning and middle end, because the future's always there. And so you're always bearing that in mind. And sometimes you're bearing, it's more obvious in the comments. I mean, there is a moment in The Rising Storm where Sterling talks about the Jedi will never be generals, and you sit there going, you fool. But so you do play on those moments because everyone's going to know what that's about. But I struggle a bit when it is just telling a story to get to a point that we already know. So anytime I write anything, which is, I mean, at the minute I've been for DC, been writing some prequel stories to tie into the new Blackadder film, and it's the same thing. I've been trying to find a solid story for those characters that will also lead us to the beginning of that film. So that's always the challenge.
Yeah, it's always very rewarding for us when we get a story that can also stand on its own, but that also has a few connections to the future.
Yeah, like this question, if you actually need to have read the original story that the prequel refers to, or if you could just enjoy the prequel on its own and maybe never read the other fiction.
Yeah. And let's face it, every time you go through, I mean, you could say now that to cross the streams, you could watch the Star Trek movies and think of the original series as the prequel to those, you know. It's you can have characters, you tell loads of different stories in their lives, and so that the thing that you're either being a prequel or a sequel to is just one aspect of their life. It's one episode of their life,
and it's always going to be somebody's entry point, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what I think everyone needs to bear in mind. There is going to be, I mean, it's unusual, I think, for people to pick up a Star Wars book before seeing anything else, but it does happen. Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah, and I mean, I am. I started with the comics. So, but, you know, so it happens, so you have to bear that in mind, you know, and it's, especially now as we're midway through an initiative, we're still trying to remember, hang on, this could be someone's first time of picking up any of this. Whether it's Star Wars or their first time reading a Star Wars novel or a comic, so you've got to try and bear that in mind. Well, also, I'm also a true believer of saying you haven't got to keep explaining stuff over and over again. I'm a comic fan. What I used to love about comics when I was a kid is I could pick up an issue of Spider-Man and not necessarily know what happened in the last issue or the previous, but you picked it up through the story, and it wasn't because Spider-Man suddenly turned around and said, "Well, do you remember when?" You absorb it through the storytelling, and that's hopefully what we're doing as well in this.
Yeah, like one of the first Star Wars novels that I read, not the first, but like the third or fourth, was the 9th book of the New Jedi Order series. I had no idea what happened before. I just found it in a a bookshop, thought it looked cool, bought it, went for it, and I somehow got the hang of it.
Yeah, and let's face it, A New Hope is the ultimate example of dropping someone midway through a story, you know, and you have that moment, which a lot of the High Republic comes from, of Obi-Wan talking to Luke and talking about the past and the Clone Wars, and we're all like, what now? Now we know what the Clone Wars look like, you know. We know a lot about the Clone Wars now. But that moment, it was the best Easter egg for something that didn't exist. And I love it when stories do that. In the other main franchise I've been a fan of, and I've worked in with Doctor Who, they were so good at just dropping in a species name or race name, and then you will return to that alien race years later, you know. So some of the best writers I love do that all the time, and again, George Lucas did it so much in Star Wars. There are so many little names that are thrown in there that we then, in Jabba as well, you know, all these things that are just there, and then later we found out. So,
you're guilty of that as well.
Oh, I do it all the time. I do it. There's some stuff I know what the answer is, and some stuff I just like a name, so I just put it in. And also that hopefully that someone else will be able to pick up on it. And there's loads of things that you want to be able to drop those sort of breadcrumbs in to someone else, like we do, you know. And yeah, I mean, there's hopefully going to be lots of stuff throughout the High Republic, not just my stuff, all of it, that will spin off into other areas of Star Wars, and we'll be able to go back and forward or pick it up later, or even, you know, go back into this era we've created now. I mean, I would imagine there are going to be stories in the High Republic for years, whether we've finished our part of that story or not. And that's part of the joy of creating this new sort of era.
We're certainly looking forward to that. I mean, the world building has been done. It would be a shame to only use it once, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And as readers, we love going back to these stories, and now phase 2 is coming out and we're going back to phase 1 and picking out everything that's in between, and hoping that maybe in phase 3 it's going to come back. So we just love rereading and finding everything that's in there.
And this entire thing has been created by 5 and now more readers who love books, you know. You know, some of us have more experience in Star Wars literature than others. But again, if it's not from Star Wars, we know what we love from other areas and other you know, series and books, and yet we know the reason we write is because we read, and so, or we watch or whatever, and so that's absolutely it's baked into our DNA to do it, and we know how much fun it is because we do it all the time.
Right. Now we've talked a little bit about prequels and how you've put all this work in High Republic. You've created wonderful characters that we've all fallen in love with, right? We had like 1.5 years to get to know them, and then you told us, you'll have to say goodbye to them for a while since we're doing another prequel to the prequel to the prequel, right? In phase 2, set 150 years earlier. It kind of feels like a bold move. Can you take us through that thinking process behind it?
I hold my hands up and admit this is my fault. So I was the one who pitched the idea of following a pattern that someone else created, of telling a story starting in the middle and then going back. And yeah, we talked about this long and hard because it is a scary move because we didn't know if people would come with us. And we wanted there to be links, but we didn't know. We also wanted there to be new characters. We wanted it to be a jumping on point. We wanted to be able to, just like with the prequels, films, there are plenty of people who saw the prequels first and then have followed it through by watching the original trilogy. And we wanted that to be the same. We want people to be able to pick up phase 2 and then go, oh, right, okay, I wonder what happened 150 years later, and read it that way around. But yeah, it was a risk, and and it's still a risk, and we don't know. We think it's going to pay off. People seem very excited, but under a month away, we're all we are a bit nervous because it's a challenge, and also it's quite exciting. It feels exactly the same as last January before we launched the first phase. The easier thing would have been to just carry on. And there are days we think, well, why didn't we follow that easier path? But sometimes you don't follow the easy path. Sometimes you follow paths that are long and twisted.
Yeah. We hope it'll pay off then in phase 3. Mm.
Now, since you've mentioned writing and the process behind writing a little, I know that writing comes with a lot of self-doubt and sometimes also imposter syndrome, which is something that you've talked about on Twitter as well. So as a writer myself, I relate to that a lot, and that's why I'm interested in it. So if you have any advice, maybe for new writers or just something that you would like to share, I would love to hear that.
I think part of the thing is that to know that so many people go through it. I was listening to Sir Paul McCartney being interviewed, and he was saying that, with every new record he does, he thinks he's no good. And he keeps, so I've got a bookshelf that's full of my stuff that I turn around and look at to remind myself that I've been doing this a while. And he does the same. He has his records on a shelf, and he has his awards, and he has pictures of the Beatles. And you go, if a Beatle has to do that, it's the norm. It's actually healthy. It's what we are. It keeps you going. People like Neil Gaiman have talked about it loads and things like that. And I think the other thing I try and recognise in myself is that no one can say anything worse than what I tell myself about my writing. And so it's that constant thing of going, actually, I'm going to keep feeling imposter syndrome because it's making me want to carry on, because it's making me want to prove to myself that I can do it. And I honestly think it's a very healthy way of living. I think if you haven't got a tiny bit of imposter syndrome, you're in danger because you're just going to believe your own hype. And it is that, again, all my heroes, Stephen King, everyone, they all talk about it. They think that this book is the book they're going to be found out on. I was watching an interview with Stephen King from quite a few books back, actually, when he wrote Revival. And again, he said that he was really nervous 2 days before the publication because this will be the one that they find out he can't write. And and when you've got someone like that saying it, you're in good company.
Yeah, and yesterday you told a story in the panel of how you've channeled that into actually a character.
So it's totally Kiev. That's where Kiev came from. And in the panel I was saying yesterday, there was a moment where it got really bad in that first week. And it was when we were moving from... so the first week of Skywalker Ranch, to give it a bit of context, if people don't know, we were out there, we had a complete, an almost complete canvas. There were certain things we knew we couldn't go, and Lucasfilm had gone through it, so this is some of the stuff that's happening, this is some stuff that we'd rather you would avoid, which we're assuming means there's other stuff happening in the future. But then they pretty much left it open to us, and especially when you're writing something like Star Wars, you actually want the guardrails to tell you, Star Wars is very, obviously they don't have a lot of guardrails on anything, which is why people can fall down great chasms. and you desperately, and it felt a bit like one of those chasms. It felt like I was on the Death Star with knowing that I could fall and tumble down a shaft. And I just had a moment where we'd moved from like talking about Star Wars and what we love. They'd shown us episode 4 on the big screen the night before, which was an amazing experience to watch it with a group of people, and we all came out excited. And the next morning, it was the morning when we said, right, now we start spitballing ideas. Now we start talking, you know, the early seeds of what become all of our pictures for what became the High Republic. And my mind went completely blank, and I could see Charles drawing diagrams in his notebook. I could see Justina had a laptop out and she was tapping away, and Daniel was dancing, which is always a sign. And Claudia was talking about stuff that, you know, from the past that she would like to bring back and new things she would like to do. And I thought, I have nothing here. I have absolutely nothing. They've made a massive mistake. And we had a coffee break, and, you know, we were hanging out, and Daniel sort of said, I wandered off, and Daniel went, where are you going? I said, I just need half an hour. So can you tell them I'll be back? And I wandered, and there's this, behind where the buildings we were on Skywalker, there's this little pagoda, and it's like, and I walked up there and was walking around, and I felt totally wretched. I thought I should not be here. I should probably just go home now. And that's when I thought, well, what would it be like for a Jedi to feel this? You know, what would it have been for a Jedi, even in the prequels, you know, to turn up there and to know actually there was a reason I was asked to be at that table. I understood that. It wasn't by chance. They didn't pick my name out of a hat. You know, well, they might have done, but you hope they didn't.
Probably not.
But yeah, I was like, so that this must happen to people, and I'm always more interested because the Jedi as a whole, I need to see them as humans. Otherwise, I'm not very interested in them. Having that role of and then this was pre us knowing we were doing the High Republic. But I kept coming back to the idea of doing something in this era when the Jedi were Legion. And so yeah, that's where Keeve came from. And I mean, she literally was in the pitch I gave. In a very different form, but she was there, and the doubts of being that person, and that became her arc in the first phase. I mean, that's literally from the moment that we then later on when it became the High Republic and we were planning it through, and Ava came into being from combining two characters that both me and Charles were working on, and we realised we would have this marshal of Starlight Beacon. And I was like, well, this is the person then that Keeve's going to look up to and worry about. And that entire first scene in issue 1 when she's swearing out loud and she's like telling herself to stop it. And again, we've all had those moments when we've met someone and I know I'm going to say something bad. And as soon as I got that moment, I knew what the last page of issue 15 was going to be. And knowing what story arc I was planning for Ava, in that it was just like, well, suddenly there was a pattern. And so yeah, it all came from that moment when I needed half an hour because I was completely overwhelmed. And
it worked so well. It's so relatable for us, whether it's you talking about it or a fictional character.
Yeah, it's and that's hopefully what again we're doing across the board, but hopefully for me in the Jedi, I try to make all my Jedi feel like people because that's what they are. Yeah. And whether it's Stellan and Elzar on Valo, whether it's Keeve on Starlight, whether it's Ava having all kinds of problems, it's got to be there because you feel like you know what these people are, because they're not superheroes. They can do amazing things. And, you know, when it comes to, I'm a huge Superman fan and people tell me that Superman's boring. I'm like, no, you haven't got it, you know, because he's the most human person in that room, usually, when he's in stories. And that's why they're exciting.
Yeah. And that excitement, you know, that really translates in Star Wars: The High Republic as well to the fandom. And we're just wondering, like, what have your experiences with the High Republic fandom been like?
Oh, it's incredible. So we put this thing out in the middle of a pandemic, not really knowing if anyone was going to pick it up. And we would totally understood if people hadn't, because the world was ending around us, you know. So, and probably people did. And obviously, you know, High Republic Twitter was born at that, you know, at that moment and grew, and we, you know, and when we know each other virtually through those encounters, but it still felt a bit weird because we still didn't really know. We knew We knew things were selling, no matter what certain people try and make you believe.
We won't listen to those.
Yeah, we knew we had people responding. We were seeing fan art. We were seeing, everything that's great about doing something like this. But we hadn't really seen it in action. I went to one convention in London, and the first person I saw when I walked in was an Ava Chris cosplayer, and I was like, okay, that's weird. And I took a picture with them.
We had a similar experience.
Yeah. And I texted the rest of the group and went, this is insane, this is mad. And everyone was like, oh, there really is someone. It was like, yeah. And we went to Celebration in Anaheim this year, and we're going to do this panel, we're going to do a cosplay competition, no one's going to turn up. We were like convinced that we'd be doing this cosplay competition to us, and we were like, Dan, you're going to have to cosplay as Claudio. Go on then, you'll win. I'd still pay him money to see it. And then we did the panel, and the panel was great. And again, we walked into that room going, they've put us in the wrong room. This is silly, but that's fine. We walked out and we didn't know how many people were in that panel because the lights were all on, and it was we could see the first 3 rows, and we could hear there was people in the room. And we did the panel, and then the lights went up at the end, and we all just froze because 4,000 people turned up to that panel, to a book panel, a book and comics panel. I mean, we know conventions, we know things like Celebration. It doesn't happen in that kind of number. And so that took us by surprise. And then we started hearing stories. We met someone who came up to us to say that she now has a relationship with her son because she read these books over lockdown and they have something to talk about. We met a couple who are getting married and we all hope we're going to be invited because they belong to a book club that were reading the Hohe Republik, and then you start getting these stories over and over again. And then when we did the cosplay competition, I mean, it was amazing. It was just the most, I think there's videos online you can see. We're all just, we can't quite get over it. I mean, the guy dressed as Skier, I still think is just, for me, was one of a huge moment. The fact we got 3 geodes, I think that says it already. And so, yeah, Celebration was the moment when we really realised that this was important. And again, that's when the imposter syndrome came out for all of us. That's the point. I remember there was one point we sat down at Celebration, and we'd not all seen each other properly for a long time. And we were just like, oh my heavens, we've got to keep this going now, and the pressure is a different pressure. It's before it was like, we have to try and do this. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But now it's worked and we have to keep it working. And so that's the way things have changed.
So kind of a mix of relief and pressure at the same time.
Yeah, but pressure's always good. I mean, I think that's the thing I always keep reminding myself. And it's linked to what we were talking about. You need that pressure to keep. Otherwise, you can become very blasé, you can become very lazy and just keep doing the same things. And the one thing the new phase has given us is it's forced us to try different things.
Right. But of course, you can't always be writing. So what do you do then to recharge after a busy day of crafting stories?
I watch Star Wars. Well, this is the constant thing. My hobbies are all now my job. I always say my to-do list is the same as when I was 10. And that hasn't really changed. Yeah, I mean, I read, I watch, I walk loads now just because it gets me out. But then I'm always either listening to something or thinking about something. So I do live in a constant world of stories, which I'm not.
Do you ever sleep?
I do sleep. And actually something I've really made a real effort for. And getting a smartwatch so I can actually monitor how much I'm sleeping, because it was one thing where I wasn't sleeping. I'm a very organised person. So I was talking to one of the guys I've signing books with earlier on. I do my days are planned to the tiniest minute when I'm working. So people say, how do you do it? It's like, well, it's all in the planning. But so I am making a real effort to stop as well in the evenings. I have taken you'll notice in phase 2 and probably in phase 3 that I'm not going to be writing as much in the Hohe Republik, just because I can't write as much as I did in phase 1. There was a lot. And also, it was an extended period of time, which I can't do now because we're not writing with a 6 months gap caused by an international pandemic. So yeah, it's I'm very regimented in my time, but I'm also now getting very regimented in my downtime as well.
We hope it's working then.
Yeah. I mean, and there's Lego as well. There's always Lego. A lot of Lego.
Now, you just said that you're always thinking about stories. So if you were to be in Star Wars, would you also be a writer, or would you have a completely different kind of life?
I'd be a rubbish Jedi. I would. I'm an okay driver, but I don't think they should put me in charge of a spaceship. I don't know. I think there would be. I'm quite fascinated by the idea of, because I'm originally a journalist. That's where I came from, and so there's no, there are journalists who turn up in my work. I mean, there's one in the Rising Storm, and it's very purposeful because I needed a perspective I could get my head into for dealing with something like that. And I think I would try. I think I would try and be a. This might not work in the Imperial days, but to be a journalist and a storyteller, I think if any galaxy needed storytellers, it's a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah, they also need to recharge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
But they don't have paper, which is still blows my mind. And so I don't know how they really do this.
Though some authors have come up with stuff that is paper but not paper.
I just keep putting paper in and getting told to put it out because it's the most basic technology in the world. And so, I'm sure some
Well, Luke had it in The Last Jedi. So
exactly.
Why not, right? Then thinking about characters that you haven't written yet in Star Wars. You've written quite a lot already, but still, are there any still on your wish list that you desperately want to get your hands on?
I think everyone who follows me knows my love of the Darth Bane novels, and I'd love to write Darth Bane. I would be terrified to write Darth Bane because I love those books so much. It's not so much the characters I haven't read, but I'd love to write more. I mean, I would write Finn, Poe, and Rey forever if I could, and I have so many ideas of what's happening to those three and their related groups. So if I could choose and I could wave a magic wand, I think that would be where I want to go next. So instead of doing a prequel to a prequel, do a sequel to a sequel.
All right, then fingers crossed you'll get your wish.
Yeah, we were just talking about things that Star Wars doesn't have, like paper. Now, is there anything in Star Wars that you would like to have in real life?
Oh, that's a good droids, because then my house would be clean. I've got a robot vacuum cleaner which is called R2D-Bot, and I love him because we also have pets and there's hay everywhere and things. So I think droids would be a marvelous thing. Obviously, there would be ethical considerations of how sentient they are, etc. But the idea of having a droid that could just help out with things would just be. Yeah, but again, whether that's a protocol droid or a robot shaped like a dog, I don't really care as long as it's a robot and I can talk to it.
Well, that's a really smart choice.
Yeah.
Well, Anthony Daniels is here. Maybe you can.
I know. Every time I've said this near him, he's run. I don't know what that's about. So, yeah.
Oh no, another bridge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well then, do you have like a go-to drink while writing? That was one of yours, wasn't it?
It was one of mine, because I keep drinking coffee while doing anything.
I drink coffee until midday and then tea in the afternoons, and then depending how the deadline's going, gin. It's always I need my coffee in the mornings, and as I get older, I need it even more. So
I feel that, and I think Maru also feels that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, right. Well, we're already coming to an end, but there's one thing I do have to ask you about, and I'd be remiss in my duties if I didn't. Okay. It concerns a certain green rabbit. First of all, where do you see Jackson's place in Star Wars, and is there more coming up?
Well, obviously, when it comes to anything to do with the future, I have to say time will tell. It always does. But
that's the mantra of this weekend.
Exactly. For me, Jackson is the reminder that, don't judge anything by its cover, and also don't take everything seriously. And I think that's. I mean, I literally got to put these words into Jackson's mouth in the short story from a certain point of view. The rebels have a fish as an admiral. It's like there are spiders everywhere that can talk and operate machinery, and so
Chewbacca, right?
Exactly. So a green rabbit doesn't seem that strange in the middle of, you know, in the middle of everything now. But it is the case. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think everyone knows now my love of Jackson comes from my experience of Star Wars in the Marvel comics. I do love the idea of a character that, and this is probably, it wasn't so much in the original Jackson in a way, but it's become my version of Jackson, is that everyone treats him as that green rabbit over there, you know, and it is not, isn't that the message of Star Wars, is that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, and it's never it's the ship you think is going to fly out, you know, fly to pieces, is going to be the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy. And so for me, that's what Jackson is. It's the reminder to have fun. It's the reminder that things can be silly. And it's the reminder that the least impressive person in the room can be the one who can be the most effective.
Well said. And ironically, we've now got more Jackson content in canon, I think, or more stories with him than in the original Legends.
Someone said to me now that I've written Jackson more than anyone else. I'm not sure this is something that's, you know, to go on my gravestone, but it's true. Yeah, and, you know, but the great thing was I honestly thought I had 8 pages and that was it. You know, I'd been banging on about this for ages, and, you know, I mean, it was even announced April the 1st, so everyone thought it was an April Fool's joke when it was announced. But people, and especially kids, absolutely loved him. And so the fact now that he's gone to have annuals, and he's been in, you know, when he was in the last Vader's cast, the fact I could even say in the last Vader's cast series, oh, Jackson's going to be in it. And it wasn't even oh, you're joking. It was, of course he is. You know, it was, and the fact that, you know, when we did the From a Certain Point of View, I could write a Jackson bit of prose, you know, it's incredible. And it's all because people took him to their hearts, you know, like I had done all those years ago. And there's lots of people who still don't like him, and that's fine, because there's lots of things in Star Wars that, you know, you haven't got to like everything. I mean, that's I think the thing we all need to remember. But yeah, I will write Jackson as long as they'll let me write Jackson, as long as I can find something new to say with him. But yeah, I can't say anything about the future. I know I've still got things I want to do with Jackson, and there are little bits in my past Jackson stories that perhaps if you look back, you can see where I think I'm going to take him in the future if I have a chance. But
we shall.
You know, time will tell, as I keep saying.
It always does,
yeah.
Right? Yeah. Well, Jackson even has an action figure now.
I know, it's crazy, and there's a statue coming, and there was that incredible Jackson cosplayer at a Celebration. I mean, there's been a few in time, but there's the one in particular, if you saw him on my feed.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And then that's only halfway through his costume development. So the new version, he reckons the next Celebration, his mouth's going to be moving, and he's going to be, you know, he's got full animatronics in his head. And he keeps trying to put, you know, he's going to push it forward and forward and forward. And yeah, and I've snuck him into the back of the Jedi Trials series, the kids series. You know, he's in some of the stories there in the background. Yes. I think I will finally rest when I see him on screen. I think that'll be, whether it's from me or someone else. When I see Jackson, then I think I'll be able to say my work here is done, and I can wander off into the distance with the Incredible Hulk.
Into a binary sunset.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, Cavan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
It was so lovely.
Yeah, whether that's High Republic or Jackson, and for the future, we wish you all the best.
Thank you.
We'll keep reading, right?
Of course.
It's always good to hear.
All right, then. Thank you.